My father didn't just reject me that night. He erased me. In front of 80 people, at his own retirement party, he looked me in the eye and said, "That seat is for my real daughter." And then he put his hands on my shoulders and pushed me. I hit the floor hard. The sound of my dress tearing echoed louder than the room. It was my mother's dress, the one she wore before cancer took her. I wore it that night, for him. But the worst part? It wasn't the fall. It was what happened next. Because the girl he called his real daughter stepped forward and calmly took my seat, like she had been waiting for that moment for years. And no one said a word. Not one person. I should have walked out right then. I was seconds away from leaving. Forever. But what my father didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that everything he believed about me had been carefully rewritten. For 3 years, and the man standing in the back of that room, my husband, had something in his pocket that was about to destroy it all. If you've ever been misunderstood or made to feel like you don't belong in your own family, take a second to subscribe. Not just for this story, but for the ones that might feel a little too familiar. Because what happened next wasn't just the truth coming out. It was something much bigger. Let me take you back to the moment everything started to fall apart. And I promise you, there's one detail in this story that nobody sees coming. My name is Heather. I'm 31 years old, and for most of my life, I believed I understood what family meant. Not the perfect kind you see in movies, but the kind that feels solid, like something you can lean on without thinking. My father, Richard, was a foreman at a manufacturing plant just outside Dayton, Ohio. 35 years, same place, same routine. He wasn't a man of many words, but when he spoke, you listened. On Saturdays, he used to take me with him to construction sites. I'd be this tiny kid, walking around in steel-toe boots that were at least 2 sizes too big. I remember trying to keep up with him, stepping where he stepped, pretending I understood everything he was explaining. He'd point at a steel beam and say, "See that, Heather? That's load-bearing. It holds everything else up." I was 9. I didn't really get it, but I nodded anyway, because I wanted to be like him. Years later, I became a structural engineer, and only then I realized he hadn't just been talking about buildings. He was teaching me about life, about responsibility, about strength, about the invisible things that keep everything from falling apart. My mother, Linda, was the opposite of him in almost every way. She was an ER nurse. She worked night shifts, so she could be home when I got back from school. She always smelled like antiseptic and lavender, and she had this way of humming while she cooked, completely off-key, like she didn't care who heard. But somehow, that made our tiny kitchen feel warmer than anywhere else in the world. We had this oak dining table. My dad built it the year I was born. 3 chairs, one for him, one for my mom, one for me. No extras, no one missing, no one extra, he used to say. And for a long time, that was true, until the day everything changed. My mom was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer when I was 11. 14 months later, she was gone. I was 12 years old, sitting in a house that suddenly felt too quiet, too big, too empty. But my father didn't break. At least, not in front of me. He still went to work every morning, still made dinner every night, still sat at that same table, in that same chair. My mom's chair stayed empty. Not for a week, not for a month, for years. I never asked him to keep it that way. He just did, and I think that was his way of holding on. For 3 years, it was just the two of us. No distractions, no replacements, just silence and routine and a kind of quiet understanding. We didn't talk about grief. We lived around it. And somehow, that felt enough. Until one evening, he came home and said something that didn't fit into that quiet world we had built. I met someone. That was it. No long explanation, no build-up. Just, I met someone. I remember standing there in the kitchen, holding a glass of water I hadn't taken a sip from. And for the first time in years, something inside me shifted. Not broke, not yet, just shifted. He looked at me, almost cautiously, like he wasn't sure how I'd react. "She's not going to replace your mother," he said. And I believed him. I really did, because this was my father, the man who left my mother's chair empty for 3 years, the man who taught me that some things aren't meant to be replaced. So I nodded. I told him, "That's okay." And in that moment, I thought we were still standing on something solid. I didn't know. That was the first crack, the one you don't notice right away, the one that doesn't make a sound, the one that slowly spreads until one day, everything collapses. Because the woman he brought into our lives didn't just walk into our home. She walked into our history, and little by little, she started rewriting it. Her name was Victoria Ashford. The first time I saw her, she was standing in our living room, wearing a cream-colored cashmere wrap, like she had stepped out of a magazine instead of into our home. She smiled the moment she saw me, not a warm smile, not the kind my mother used to give. It was practiced, careful, like she had rehearsed it in a mirror. "This must be Heather," she said. Her voice was soft, controlled, almost too perfect. And standing just behind her was her daughter, Brooke. She was about 2 years younger than me. Long hair, perfect posture. The kind of girl who looked like she always knew exactly what to say. "Hi," she said brightly, stepping forward like we were already friends. I nodded. That was all. Dinner that night felt different. Victoria brought a bottle of wine. I didn't know much about wine back then, but I remember my father hesitating before opening it, like it didn't belong on our table, like it didn't belong in our life. But he opened it anyway, and that was the first time I saw it. Not a big change, not something obvious, just a small shift, the kind you can almost ignore. Victoria asked me about school. She complimented the curtains my mother had picked out. She even offered to teach me how to drive. It all sounded kind, thoughtful, normal, and maybe that's why I didn't see it coming. Because nothing about her was openly cruel. Not at first. She didn't push. She didn't demand. She adjusted, slowly, carefully, like someone testing the weight of a structure before deciding where to apply pressure. They got married when I was 15. It was a small ceremony. Victoria wore ivory. My father looked calm, not happy, not excited, just settled, like he had made a decision and didn't plan on revisiting it. I wore a black dress my mom had bought me years before. It was the only formal thing I owned. No one said anything about it, but I remember feeling out of place, like I was attending something instead of belonging to it. For the first few months, everything stayed manageable. Victoria kept being kind, polite, helpful, and Brooke fit in faster than I expected. She laughed at my dad's jokes, sat close to him at dinner, asked him questions about work, like she genuinely cared, and my father responded. At first, it was small, a smile here, a laugh there, but then something changed. I remember one evening, standing in the kitchen doorway, watching them at the table. The new table, because the old one was already gone. Victoria had replaced it. Marble top, clean lines. More modern, she said. My father agreed. The oak table, the one he built, the one with 3 chairs, was moved to the garage. Just like that. No discussion, no hesitation. And I told myself, it was just furniture, just a table. But it wasn't, because a few weeks later, my chair disappeared too. The one with my initials carved into the back. We needed a matching set, Victoria explained, smoothing a linen napkin like it mattered more than what she had taken. And my father said nothing. That was the moment I should have spoken up. I felt it, that tightness in my chest, that quiet voice telling me something wasn't right. But I didn't say anything. I stayed quiet, because arguing over chairs felt small. And my father wasn't the kind of man who dealt with small things. He dealt with real problems, load-bearing problems. At least, that's what I told myself. But what I didn't understand back then was that this wasn't about furniture. It was about replacement. And Brooke was becoming part of that process. She moved in full-time not long after. Her room was redesigned. Fresh paint, new furniture, everything new, everything hers. And one night, as we sat around that marble table, she looked at my father, smiled, and said it. "Good night, Dad." Just like that, like it had always been true, like it belonged to her. And my father didn't correct her. He didn't hesitate. He didn't even look surprised. He smiled. And he hugged her. Right there at the table, I stood in the kitchen doorway, watching it happen. And for the first time, I didn't feel like something had shifted. I felt it clearly. Something was being replaced. And I was the only one who seemed to notice. Because from that moment on, it wasn't just the house that was changing. It was my place in it. At first, I told myself I was imagining it, that I was being sensitive, that things change, and I just needed to adjust. But change doesn't usually feel like disappearing. And that's what it started to feel like. Not all at once. Not in a way anyone could point to and say, "See, that's where it happened." It was slower than that. Quieter, more deliberate. Like pieces of me were being removed, one at a time. The first thing to go was my room. I came home from school one afternoon, and the door was open. Not unusual, but inside, nothing looked the same. The walls had been repainted. Soft, neutral colors. Not the pale blue my mom had picked out. My bed was gone. My desk was gone. Even the small bookshelf my dad had helped me build was gone. In its place, yoga mats, mirrors, neatly stacked towels. I stood there for a long moment, trying to understand what I was looking at. Victoria appeared behind me. "We needed the space," she said gently. "Brooke has online classes, and she needed a quieter room." A quieter room. Brooke already had a room. But I didn't say that. Instead, I asked, "Where are my things?" She smiled and pointed toward the garage. "Everything's packed neatly in boxes, sweetheart." Sweetheart. I walked out there later that evening. 3 cardboard boxes. That was all that was left of my room, stacked beside the oak table, like things that didn't belong in the house anymore. I remember running my hand across one of the boxes, feeling the tape under my fingers, and realizing something I didn't want to admit. This wasn't temporary. This wasn't making space. This was removal. And I let it happen. That was the pattern. Every time something shifted, every time something was taken, there was always a reason. Always something practical, something small enough that fighting it would make me look unreasonable. So I stayed quiet, again, and again, and again. My mother's photos were next. At first, they moved from the living room to the hallway, then from the hallway to a shelf in the basement. No announcement, no conversation, just gone. I noticed it one day when I came home, and the wall above the fireplace looked empty, clean, like no one had ever been there. I asked my father about it. He barely looked up from his plate. "Victoria's redecorating," he said. That was it. No hesitation, no question, just acceptance. And that hurt more than I expected, because my father wasn't a man who overlooked details. He built things. He noticed when something was off, when a beam didn't align, when a structure wasn't stable. But somehow, he didn't see this. Or maybe he chose not to. My mother's garden didn't last much longer either. She had planted it the spring before she got sick. Coneflowers, black-eyed Susans, bright colors, the kind that came back every year. I used to sit out there with her, watching her pull weeds, listening to her talk about nothing and everything at the same time. One weekend, I came home, and it was gone. Pulled out completely, replaced with ornamental grass. Green, uniform, neat. But it didn't bloom. It just existed, like something designed to look alive, without actually being alive. I stood there for a long time, staring at it, trying to understand how something so full of life could be erased so completely. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't about space. This wasn't about decoration. This was about rewriting, piece by piece, memory by memory. My mother was being removed from this house, and without her, there was less of a reason for me to be there. By the time I turned 18, I didn't argue anymore, didn't question, didn't push back. I left Clemson University, full scholarship, structural engineering. It should have felt like freedom, a new beginning. And in some ways, it was. But as I packed my things, the few things I still had left, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't leaving home. I was being phased out of it. My father drove me to campus, helped me carry my boxes, set them down in my dorm room, like he had done everything else in my life, quietly, efficiently, without making a scene. We stood in the parking lot for a while after. Neither of us said much. "I'll be fine," I told him. He nodded. "I know." And for a moment, it almost felt normal again, like nothing had changed, like we were still us. But as I turned to walk away, I felt something I hadn't felt before. Distance, not physical, something else, something harder to define. And I didn't know it then. But that distance was about to become silence, because a few months later, I would call him, and he wouldn't answer. And I would keep calling for 3 years without ever hearing his voice again. The first time my father didn't answer, I didn't think much of it. People miss calls. It happens. I left a voicemail, short, simple. "Hey, Dad, it's me. Call me when you get this." I remember staring at my phone for a few seconds after I hung up, like I expected it to ring back immediately. It didn't, but that was normal, right? He was probably at work, or busy, or just forgot. So I waited. I called again the next day, and the day after that. Still nothing. No callback, no text, no explanation, just silence. At first, I told myself not to overthink it. My father wasn't the kind of man who lived on his phone. He didn't text much. He didn't check notifications. He barely knew how to use half the features on it. So maybe he just didn't see it. That made sense. It was a reasonable explanation, comforting even, until it wasn't. Because a week passed, then 2, then a month, and the silence didn't break. I kept calling every Sunday, sometimes twice a week, always around the same time. Like consistency might make a difference. Like if I kept the rhythm steady enough, he'd eventually pick up. I left messages. At first, they were casual. "Hey, just checking in. Hope you're doing okay." Then they became softer, more careful. "I miss you. Call me when you can." And eventually, they became something else, something quieter, something that felt closer to asking permission. "Hey, Dad, I just wanted to hear your voice." I never said it out loud, but every message carried the same question. Did I do something wrong? Weeks turned into months. Months turned into a year. And still, nothing. Not one response, not one acknowledgement. It started to change the way I thought. Not just about him, but about myself. Because when someone you love goes silent for that long, you don't just question them. You question everything. Every conversation you ever had. Every decision you made. You start replaying moments. Looking for something you missed. Something that could explain it. I went back over that last Christmas. The one I couldn't make it home. I had been stuck on a job site. The project was behind schedule. There were safety issues. Serious ones. I couldn't leave. So I called him, left a message. "I'm sorry, Dad. I can't make it this year. I'll come in January." No reply. I texted him that night. "Merry Christmas. I love you." Nothing. Not even a read receipt. I called again on New Year's Day, straight to voicemail. That's when I started to worry. Not about us. About him. I thought maybe something had happened. So I called the house. The landline. Victoria answered. Her voice was calm. Too calm. "He doesn't want to talk right now, Heather," she said. "I think you should respect that." Respect that. I remember standing there, phone pressed to my ear, trying to process what she had just said. "He doesn't want to talk to me?" I asked. There was a pause, just long enough to feel intentional. Yes, that was all. No explanation. No context. Just, yes. I didn't argue. I didn't push. Because part of me didn't want to hear anything else. So I said okay, and I hung up. That was the moment everything changed. Because up until then, I believed there was a reason. A misunderstanding. Something that could be fixed. But after that call, it felt like a decision. His decision. And I didn't know why. I kept calling anyway. Every week. Like clockwork. 147 calls, 42 messages, 3 years. No response. I drove to the house twice. Both times, Victoria met me at the door. Arms crossed. Same expression. Same words. "He doesn't want to see you, Heather. Please stop making this harder than it has to be." Harder. I remember that word because it made me feel like I was the problem. Like I was the one causing pain, not the one trying to fix it. I could have pushed past her. I could have walked into that house, demanded to see him, forced a conversation. But I didn't. And I've thought about that a lot. Why I didn't. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was fear. Or maybe it was something simpler. If my father didn't want me in his life anymore, I wasn't going to beg. So I stopped going to the house. But I didn't stop calling. Not completely, because somewhere deep down, I still believed something wasn't right. That this didn't feel like him. But I didn't have proof, just a feeling. And feelings aren't always enough. Not when silence is all you're given. Not when every attempt you make disappears into nothing. So eventually, I stopped expecting an answer. And that might have been the hardest part. Not the rejection, not the silence, but the acceptance of it. The moment you stop hoping and start adjusting. The moment you tell yourself, this is just how things are now. I built a life, a career. I met Marcus. I moved forward. Or at least, I tried to. But there was always something unresolved, something unfinished. Because no matter how much time passed, no matter how much I told myself to let it go, one question never left me. Why? Why would my father, the man who never left my mother's chair empty, walk away from me without a single word? I didn't know it then, but the answer had been sitting in his pocket the entire time, waiting. And in just a few weeks, I was about to walk into a room where that silence would finally break. And when it did, it wouldn't be quiet. It would be loud enough for everyone to hear. I remember the exact sound. Not my father's voice, not Victoria's heels on the floor. It was the silence, the kind that doesn't just sit in a room, but presses down on your chest until breathing feels optional. My father was still holding the paper. That forged signature, his name, written by someone else. And for the first time in my life, he looked lost. Not angry, not defensive, lost. Like a man who just realized the house he built was standing on someone else's lie. "Victoria," he said slowly, his voice thinner now, stripped of authority, stripped of certainty. "Tell me this isn't true." She didn't answer right away, and that hesitation was louder than anything she could have said. "You signed it," she finally replied, her voice softer now, almost pleading. "You just don't remember. You've been under a lot of stress, Richard. My mind is fine." He didn't raise his voice, but something in it changed. The tone of a man who no longer accepts explanation, only truth. "I've signed my name for over 60 years, he continued, lifting the paper slightly. "I know how I write it." The room shifted. You could feel it. People weren't just watching anymore. They were choosing sides. And for the first time that night, Victoria didn't control the narrative. Brooke stood up suddenly. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor. "Dad, this is ridiculous," she said quickly, her voice shaky now. "They're trying to turn you against us. That's what this is. Us." That word hung in the air. Not family, not everyone, just us. My father turned to her, and I saw it, the moment, that tiny crack where doubt turns into awareness. "Do you know anything about this?" he asked. Brooke froze, just for a second, but it was enough. "No," she said quickly. "Of course not. I would never." "Sit down." He didn't shout, but she sat. Immediately, because deep down, she knew that something had already shifted. Victoria stepped forward again, desperate now, her composure slipping. "This is insane," she said louder, this time turning toward the guests. "They came here to humiliate him. This whole thing, this is planned." And for a moment, just a moment, it almost worked, because people want to believe the easier story, the cleaner one, the one where everything still makes sense. But then Donna spoke from the back of the room, calm, steady, unshakable. That's not accurate. Every head turned. She walked forward slowly, holding her folio like it weighed nothing, but carried everything. I've processed Mr. Purcell's retirement documents for over 20 years, she said. And I flagged this form 2 months ago. Victoria turned sharply. Donna, this has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with me. Her voice didn't rise, but it cut through the room. Clean, precise. This document was submitted electronically, Donna continued, from a personal Gmail account. She paused. And in 22 years, Mr. Purcell has never submitted paperwork electronically. My father nodded slowly. That's right, he said quietly. I always came in person. Donna continued opening her folio. The signature doesn't match internal records. And the submission IP address. She looked directly at Victoria. My detail traces back to your home. That was it. That was the moment the illusion collapsed. Not dramatically, not loudly, but completely. Victoria's face changed. Not the controlled smile, not the wounded expression. Something else, something raw, cornered. You had no right, she snapped. I had every obligation, Donna replied calmly. Silence again, but different this time. Not tense, not uncertain, resolved. My father turned back toward Victoria, slowly, deliberately. You blocked her too, didn't you? He asked. Her eyes flickered. That was all it took. You told me she never called, he continued. You told me she stopped caring. His voice broke. She called me every week. He looked at the printed records again. And I never knew. Victoria exhaled sharply. And then she stopped pretending. Fine, she snapped. The mask dropped. Completely. Yes. I blocked her number. Gasps, soft, scattered, moved through the room. She was toxic, Richard. Victoria continued, her voice, rising now. She was trying to pull you back into the past, into that life, into Linda, into everything you needed to move on from. She was my daughter. That broke it, not loudly, but permanently. Victoria faltered. For the first time, she didn't have a response ready. She was confusing you, Victoria insisted, but weaker now. You were finally moving forward. I was protecting this family. This family, he repeated. His voice wasn't angry anymore. It was hollow. You erased my daughter. You forged my name. You took my retirement. He shook his head slowly. And you call that family. No one defended her. Not one person. Brooke looked down. Guests avoided eye contact. Even the room itself felt like it had stepped away from her. Victoria stood there, alone. For the first time in 16 years, she had no script left. And I realized something in that moment. This wasn't just about money, or documents, or lies. This was about control, about rewriting reality so completely that even truth sounded like betrayal. But truth has a way of surfacing. Not all at once, but enough to break the illusion, enough to force a choice. And my father was finally starting to see. The room didn't move. Not a single fork, not a single chair. 80 people, and yet it felt like there were only 3 of us left standing in that moment. My father, Victoria, and me. He didn't look at her again. Not right away. Instead, he did something I hadn't seen him do in 3 years. He looked at me. Really looked. Not through me. Not past me. At me. His eyes moved slowly from my face to the torn hem of my dress, to my hands still trembling slightly at my sides. That's your mother's dress, he said quietly. My throat tightened. Yes. A pause. You wore it. For tonight. I wore it for you, I said. Because she should have been here. Something in his face shifted. Not cleanly, not all at once, but it broke, like a structure that had been holding under pressure for too long, finally giving way at its weakest point. He looked down at his hands. The same hands that had pushed me to the floor. I did that, he said under his breath. I pushed you. Yes, no softness, no cushioning, just truth. In front of everyone. Yes, he closed his eyes briefly. And when he opened them again, the certainty was gone, replaced by something much harder to face, responsibility. I don't know how I let this happen, he said, almost to himself. I don't know how I believed all of it. He looked toward Victoria, but not with anger, with recognition of what he had allowed. She told me you stopped calling," he continued. "She said you moved on, that you didn't want anything to do with me anymore." I didn't interrupt. I let him say it, because he needed to hear himself. "I believed her," he said, "because it was easier than admitting I didn't know how to fix things after your mom died." That landed, not just on me, on everyone. The truth behind the lie. Not an excuse, but a reason. And sometimes, that matters. He took a step closer. "Just one. I failed you," he said. Silence. "I failed you for 3 years. And tonight, I failed you again." His voice shook. "I'm sorry." There it was. Not perfect, not rehearsed, but real. And that made it harder, not easier. Because apologies don't erase memory. They don't undo impact. They just open a door. And it's up to you whether you walk through it. I looked at him, really looked. This wasn't the man from 20 minutes ago. This wasn't the man who pushed me. This was the man who used to carry me on his shoulders at job sites, pointing at beams and saying, "Everything holds something else up." And right now, he was barely holding himself together. "I accept your apology," I said slowly. Relief flickered across his face, but I didn't let it settle. "But that doesn't fix everything." It faded. "We're not okay just because you said sorry," I continued. "You don't get to skip 3 years of silence and land back at normal." He nodded, slowly. "I know." "Good," I said. "Because if we're going to rebuild anything—" I paused. "It has to be real this time." He exhaled, long, shaky. "Then we start here," he said. "A beginning, not a resolution." And somehow, that felt more honest than anything else that night. Behind him, Victoria let out a sharp breath. "Oh, please," she snapped, stepping forward again. "Can't anyone see what this is?" No one answered. She looked around the room, searching for support, validation, anything. "This was planned," she insisted. "They came here to humiliate you, Richard. This whole thing is a setup." Still nothing. Not one person stepped in. Not one person agreed. And that silence was louder than all her words combined. My father turned his head slightly. "You planned tonight," he said flatly. Her expression tightened. "The seating chart," he continued. "The slideshow, with no pictures of Heather, no pictures of Linda." Each word landed heavier than the last. "You erased them." "I was protecting you," she shot back. From what he asked. No answer, just tension. "You didn't protect me," he said quietly. "You controlled me." That hit hard, because it was the truth she couldn't rewrite. Victoria's posture stiffened. For a moment, I thought she might try again. Another angle, another story. But then, something in her gave way. Not dramatically, not emotionally, just stopped. Like she realized the performance was over, and there was no audience left to convince. Brooke stood near the edge of the room, watching, silent, caught between everything she had gained and everything that had just collapsed. My father didn't look at her. Not yet. He wasn't ready. None of us were. Because some damage doesn't resolve in a single moment. It settles, slowly, and leaves you to decide what comes next. He looked back at me. "The seat at that table," he said. I followed his gaze. The chair, the one I had walked across the room for, the one he had pushed me away from. "That was always yours," he said. I just forgot. Forgot. Such a small word for something that big. But I understood what he meant, and for the first time that night, I believed him. Not completely. Not yet. But enough to stay. The room never fully went back to normal. How could it? You don't watch a life unravel in real time and then return to polite conversation like nothing happened. People spoke in softer voices. Chairs moved more carefully. Glasses touched the table with less sound. And in the center of it all, my father stood there, like a man trying to understand how everything he trusted had shifted beneath his feet. He turned back to the table, slowly, deliberately. Then he did something simple, but it meant everything. He reached for the chair, the one I had tried to sit in, the one he had taken from me. He pulled it out, not halfway, not casually, fully, and he stepped aside. No words, just the gesture, an invitation. I walked toward it. Each step felt heavier than it should have. Not because of the room, not because of the people watching, but because of what it meant to sit down again. After everything that had just happened, I reached the table, placed my hand on the back of the chair, And for a brief second, I hesitated because sitting down didn't mean everything was fixed. It didn't mean trust was restored. It didn't mean the past 3 years disappeared. But it meant something else. It meant I was choosing to stay. I sat, and for the first time in 3 years, I was next to my father again. Not across a memory, not through silence, but right there, beside him. The rest of the evening dissolved around us. Guests came and went. Some offered quiet handshakes. Some said nothing at all, which in its own way said everything. A man named Phil, someone who had worked with my father for decades, placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "You've still got people who care about you, Rick." My father nodded, but his eyes kept drifting back to the table, to the papers, to the truth laid out in black and white. Donna approached before she left. Calm, professional, but not distant. "Mr. Purcell," she said, "I'll need to file a formal report with HR first thing Monday morning." He nodded. "Your accounts will be frozen pending investigation. No changes can be made until everything is verified." "Do it," he said quietly. "And thank you." She gave a small nod, then turned to me. "You didn't give up," she said. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded. Because sometimes, persistence doesn't feel like strength. It feels like survival. Marcus met me near the exit. He didn't ask if I was okay. He already knew I wasn't. Instead, he placed his hand gently at my back. Steady, grounding. "I'm here," he said. And that was enough. We left together. No drama, no final confrontation. Just walking out. The same doors I had nearly walked through earlier. Only now, everything behind me had changed. The drive home was quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't need to be filled. Streetlights passed in long, steady intervals, and I watched my reflection in the window. The navy dress, the torn hem, still there. A reminder of impact, of truth, of everything that had surfaced. "You knew before tonight," I said finally. Marcus nodded slightly. For 2 weeks, I turned toward him. "You didn't tell me." I needed to be sure he replied. "I wasn't going to give you hope unless I could back it up." That was him. Always precise, always certain, not with emotions, but with facts. And tonight, facts had mattered. "There's something else," he added. I felt my chest tighten slightly. "What?" 3 years ago. "Christmas Eve," he said. I already knew where this was going. "You left him a message, and you sent a text." I nodded slowly. "Merry Christmas. I love you." "It was read," Marcus said quietly. 11:47 p.m. My breath caught. He saw it. Marcus paused, then shook his head slightly. Someone opened it. A beat, then deleted it. I closed my eyes. Just for a second, because that hurt in a different way. Not loud, not explosive, but deep, intentional. The next morning, for the first time in 3 years, my phone rang, his name on the screen. I stared at it for a moment, then answered. We didn't talk about everything. Not yet. We couldn't. But we didn't need to. Because sometimes, hearing someone again is enough to begin. 2 weeks later, I stood in front of my father's house. The same house, but different. The door was unlocked. I stepped inside, and the first thing I noticed was the table. The old oak table, back in its place. Not perfect, not untouched, but restored. My chair was there too, initials still carved into the back. HP. He had kept it all this time. It's not perfect, he said, from behind me. Some of the damage won't come out. I ran my hand along the surface, the scratches, the grooves, the history. That's okay, I said. Some things aren't supposed to. We sat down. 2 cups of coffee. No marble. No performance. Just real. On the wall behind him, my mother's photo, back where it belonged. I glanced at his phone on the table. Screen on. Settings open. Blocked contacts. Empty. He noticed me looking. I figured it out, he said. I nodded. A small thing. But not really. People ask me now if I forgave him. The truth, forgiveness isn't a moment. It's a process. Some days are easier. Some aren't. Some days I still remember the floor, the sound of fabric tearing, the words, "You're not my real daughter." And I have to choose whether to carry that forward or set it down. But here's what I know. That wasn't the end of our story. It was the moment that almost became the end. And somehow, we didn't let it. Because in the end, it wasn't the perfect apology, or the dramatic reveal, or even the truth that changed everything. It was the choice to show up, to speak, to stay, even after everything. And sometimes, that's enough to start again. If you step back and look at this story, not just as a viewer, but through a more analytical lens, you'll notice something important. This was never just a family drama. It was a systematic psychological takeover. Victoria didn't destroy this relationship overnight. She didn't need to. She used 3 very precise mechanisms. First, isolation, blocking communication, controlling access, rewriting absence as rejection. Second, narrative manipulation, repeating a version of reality until it became the only version your father believed. And third, financial control. Because when someone controls your perception and your assets, they don't just influence your life, they own it. Now here's the part most people miss. Your father wasn't weak. He was emotionally exhausted. Grief, loneliness, and the fear of starting over, those are the exact conditions where manipulation works best. And Heather, she made a mistake too. Not a moral failure, but a strategic one. She chose silence over confrontation. She thought distance would protect her dignity. But in reality, it created a vacuum, and someone else stepped in to fill it. That's the real lesson here, because this story isn't rare. It happens more often than people realize, especially in families where communication breaks down quietly, not violently. So if you take anything from this, let it be this. Don't assume silence means peace. Sometimes it means someone else is speaking in your place. And if there's one question this story leaves you with, it's this. Who is controlling the narrative in your life right now? Is it truth? Or is it simply the loudest voice you've been hearing? Take a moment and think about that. And if this story made you pause, reflect, or see something in your own life a little more clearly, go ahead and hit that like button, not for the algorithm, but as a signal that stories like this matter. And if you want more stories that don't just entertain, but help you understand people, relationships, and the hidden dynamics behind them, consider subscribing to the channel, because sometimes the most valuable thing a story can give you is clarity. And sometimes clarity changes everything.